The media is abuzz with claims that Donald Trump is openly criticizing Vladimir Putin. Breaking news today. As Washington continues to pursue unsuccessful globalist policies, it's American families who are bearing the brunt.
Hello, and welcome to That News Show, where we discuss the latest facts, fakes, and hypocrisy as reported by the legacy media. Let's roll the tape.
On this, NBC reports that Donald Trump is furiously criticizing Vladimir Putin. Now, with Trump openly condemning Putin's actions, the media seems to have suddenly found its moral compass. The same corporate media that previously downplayed Russian aggression under the last Democratic administration now portrays Trump's stern approach to Putin as a groundbreaking revelation. It's important to note that both political parties have long advocated for a confrontational stance toward Russia, often overlooking the repercussions for ordinary Americans. This newfound outrage begs the question, where was this level of concern when Biden and Harris were in office, during which time Russia's influence grew and Ukraine's situation worsened? The truth is, Trump is prioritizing American interests, steering clear of endless wars and the interventionist policies that have historically entangled us. This leads us to consider whether we're witnessing genuine leadership or merely another effort to discredit a president who champions America, first policies, and resists submission to the global elite. Here we go again.
Trump claiming he previously made this threat to Putin and China's leader.
With Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, you're going to bomb the out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. He goes like, I don't believe you. He said, no way. And I said, way. But I said the same thing to them. I said, if you go into Taiwan, I'm going to bomb the out of Beijing.
The real threat comes not just from Beijing or Moscow, but from the failed policies and globalist ambitions that have compromised our safety and freedom. Beijing's support for Moscow's actions in Ukraine aims to diminish American influence and challenge U.S. policies. These measures have only escalated the conflict and drained our resources, while Russia's economy, supported by China and others who disregard Washington's rules, has adapted and even thrived. NATO officials now warn that a move by Beijing on Taiwan could prompt Moscow to open a second front in Europe, potentially dragging us into a conflict that serves no American interest. This policy should recognize the threats posed by authoritarian alliances without dragging us into conflicts that do not align with our national interests. Mainstream media often suggests that more sanctions, more military aid, and increased American involvement are the solutions. China and Russia are now deepening their no-limits partnership, framing it as a stand for sovereignty and a pushback against perceived American unilateralism and bullying. This scenario is a direct consequence of past foreign policy missteps. It's time to abandon the bipartisan consensus that led us here and advocate for a foreign policy that truly puts America first. The real story here isn't the headline-grabbing threats or the tough talk, but rather the dangerous entanglement of global alliances and the reckless escalation fueled by years of interventionist policies from Washington and Brussels. The previous administration's ineffective stance on Russia and China emboldened our adversaries. Rather than resorting to saber-rattling and empty threats, we need to demand accountability from those responsible for these blunders.
It's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
I echoed what the president has said, both a disappointment and frustration at the lack of progress in peace talks or in a path forward. So we'll continue to engage.
The upcoming elections may also affect U.S. involvement in Ukraine. The ongoing peace talks between Russia and Ukraine have been marked by disappointment and frustration, as both sides struggle to find common ground. This narrative tends to overlook the complexities of regional dynamics and the potential unintended consequences of increased U.S. involvement. Despite recent meetings such as the one between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, progress remains elusive. As the situation evolves, it will be crucial to evaluate whether the U.S. can effectively balance its interests with the need for peace in Ukraine without further entanglement. The current U.S. administration's approach to these talks signifies a shift in foreign policy, prioritizing American interests and advising caution against becoming entangled in foreign conflicts. Kindreds from both parties will likely face scrutiny over their foreign policy stances, especially regarding Russia and Ukraine. Republicans generally favor a measured approach, focusing on direct negotiations and avoiding further escalation, while Democrats often call for stronger sanctions and increased military aid to Ukraine, actions that some believe could further destabilize the region. As the U.S. continues its involvement, a partisan divide is emerging on how to proceed.
he needs to get control of his Pentagon, who apparently, unwitting to him, withheld weapons, and he was embarrassed in public when he was asked about it, sitting right next to the Secretary of Defense, who had signed off on withholding those weapons.
MSNBC frequently relies on former officials and analysts who advocate for a globalist, interventionist approach, representing a narrow slice of the foreign policy spectrum. The coverage seldom acknowledges the role of congressional Democrats in advocating for more aggressive interventionism or the previous administration's failures to secure American interests globally. MSNBC's coverage of the recent Pentagon weapons hold incident highlights the network's focus on internal administration disputes, often at the expense of broader context and policy substance. They also deserve media coverage that delves deeper than surface-level drama, engaging with the real questions. How are these decisions made? This often overlooks the concerns of those wary of endless military engagements and unchecked aid. MSNBC's reporting tends to spotlight moments of perceived discord without fully exploring the strategic deliberations behind such decisions. And most importantly, how do we ensure that American security and prosperity remain the central focus of our defense policy, rather than the shifting agendas of global elites and entrenched bureaucrats? The network's framing often portrays the current White House as erratic, ignoring the bipartisan nature of recent congressional defense packages and the strong support for increased military spending. Over $150 billion this year alone, aimed at modernizing capabilities and reinforcing American security. This focus on spectacle often sacrifices substantive analysis, such as the repeated focus on the Secretary of Defense's body language or the President's reactions, which provides little real insight into policy implications or the broader debate over America's global role. Visually, MSNBC excels in dramatizing tension, using split screens, urgent graphics, and selective video clips to amplify a sense of crisis. A more responsible approach would involve contextualizing these decisions within the ongoing debate over defense spending and foreign policy. The emphasis on public embarrassment and perceived lack of control over the Pentagon overshadows the real issue, the complexity and necessity of thorough oversight in deploying American military resources abroad. Instead, coverage often resorts to partisan finger-pointing and sensationalism. With national defense funding capped at nearly $900 billion for the year, and an additional $150 billion in supplemental spending proposed, Americans deserve a serious conversation about priorities, trade-offs, and the long-term consequences of our actions.
So look, you mentioned 85 senators being on board with the prospect of this, but would sanctions ultimately make any difference in Russia, considering all the sanctions they have been shouldering for years now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And on a technical level, the reality is that because we have not executed new sanctions this whole calendar year, the existing sanctions on Russia have weakened. And now Russia is today in a better financial position than they were when Donald Trump came into office on January 20th. And you combine that with the weak support for military aid to Ukraine that we've seen over the last half year. And Russia is in a stronger position today than when Trump came in. And that's very important. So the sanctions package would, of course, reassert some pressure on Russia, but it would not answer the call. But it would certainly send a signal to our NATO allies and the Ukrainians and the Russians that this president is finally catching up to where the whole national security community is, quite frankly, and where our allies are, which is that Putin is not going to stop his war unless the United States puts pressure on him.
The reality on the ground suggests a different narrative. Russia's territorial advances in Ukraine have slowed, and while its capacity for drone and missile attacks remains strong, its economy is far from collapsing. The previous administration's aggressive stance towards Russia and Ukraine only emboldened our adversaries and burdened American taxpayers with ineffective policies that failed to enhance security or stability. Although the Senate's endorsement of a new sanctions package, supported by over 85 senators, sends a political message, its practical impact on Moscow's war machine is questionable. Mainstream media outlets, especially those favoring a globalist perspective, continue to advocate for increased pressure and confrontation with Moscow. This is especially true as Russia continues to secure energy export deals with China and India. Sanctions fatigue is setting in, and it's becoming increasingly clear that Russia's economy has adapted and even strengthened despite years of Western pressure. The American people deserve a foreign policy that respects their hard work and sacrifices, one that does not risk their future on the uncertain outcomes of distant conflicts. While the Senate's strong support for new sanctions may appear as unity, it actually reflects the same bipartisan groupthink that has previously led to costly interventions. This approach marks a significant shift from the prior administration's preference for globalist ambitions and interventionist policies, which often diverted resources from domestic priorities. For American households, these policies may lead to higher energy prices and inflationary pressures as global markets react to disruptions in Russian oil and gas supplies. The bipartisan push for increased sanctions and military aid occurs as the American public grows weary of prolonged overseas engagements. It is reassessing military aid, demanding accountability, and maintaining executive flexibility on sanctions rather than escalating involvement without clear objectives. The Russian financial system has become more strong, boasting foreign reserves of $650 billion and maintaining debt levels significantly lower than those of the United States. Instead of persisting with unsuccessful strategies, Washington should prioritize economic stability and energy independence, ensuring that American interests, not those of Brussels or international bureaucrats, take precedence. Can you believe this? Ask yourself, who really benefits when the media portrays President Trump as raging at Putin? Now, they expect you to trust their judgment on Russia. The same outlets that promoted the Russia hoax now label Trump a warmonger simply because he resists their globalist agendas. Consider this. If endless conflict is the solution, what exactly was the problem? In reality, under Trump's leadership, America remains strong, avoiding reckless wars and refusing to bow to foreign pressures. Perhaps because international chaos shifts attention away from their domestic failures. What do you think? Give us your thoughts below, plus don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll be back with more soon.